Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Warning. The candlelight flickered across Rochelle's face as she laughed at something her mother said. Curtis Rogers smiled automatically, cutting into his steak while his phone vibrated in his pocket. Third time in 5 minutes. "Curtis, are you even listening?" Rochelle's voice had that edge he'd learned to recognize over their 8 years of marriage. "Of course. Your mother was talking about the gallery opening next week." He kept his tone light, warm even, as he slipped his phone from his pocket beneath the table's edge. "Unknown number. Don't react. They're recording you." Curtis's hand remained steady as he set the phone face down on his lap. He took another bite, chewed slowly, and let his gaze drift around the private dining room of Bellamy's, the upscale restaurant Rochelle had insisted on for this family dinner. His mother-in-law, Linda Randolph, sat to Rochelle's right, wearing too much jewelry and that permanent expression of vague disappointment she reserved for him. Across the table, Adrian McFarland, Rochelle's business associate, was nursing his third scotch. Something about the room felt wrong. The angle of the mirror behind Adrian. The way Rochelle's designer purse sat propped open on the empty chair, its interior facing him. The plant in the corner that hadn't been there last month, positioned with a clear sight line to his seat. Curtis had spent 15 years as an investigative journalist before launching The Unraveling, his true crime podcast that now pulled 2 million downloads per episode. He'd interviewed serial killers, exposed corporate fraud, and documented 3 wrongful convictions. He knew surveillance when he saw it. "Curtis has been so distracted lately," Linda said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Rochelle mentioned you've been working late? Still playing with that little podcast?" "Playing." The word hung in the air like bait. His phone buzzed again. Curtis glanced down. 247 missed calls from your bank. Check your voicemail. They moved the money. His heart rate should have spiked. Instead, Curtis felt the familiar cold clarity that descended when he was on to something big. This wasn't just an affair. This was orchestrated. "The podcast is doing well, Linda. We just signed a development deal with Netflix." He smiled at his mother-in-law, then turned to Adrian. "You're in real estate development, right? Rochelle mentioned you might invest in some properties downtown." Adrian's eyes flickered with something. Surprise? Calculation? "That's right. High-end residential. There's a lot of money to be made if you know what you're doing." The implication was clear. Unlike you. Curtis had researched Adrian McFarland after Rochelle first mentioned him 6 months ago. 42, divorced twice, made his fortune flipping luxury properties. Both ex-wives had walked away with nothing, claiming abuse and unstable behavior. Adrian had restraining orders, documentation, even recordings of them threatening him. The same pattern Rochelle seemed to be setting up now. "I'm sure there is," Curtis said mildly. He caught his reflection in the mirror. The hidden camera was definitely behind it. "Though I've always believed in investing in what you know. Stories, truth, human behavior. That's where the real value is." Rochelle's hand tightened on her wine glass. "Not everyone can monetize gossip, darling. True crime isn't gossip. It's about patterns. How people reveal themselves when they think no one's watching." He let that sit for a moment. "Speaking of which, I've been researching a fascinating case for the next season. A series about financial fraud in marriages. The way some people manufacture evidence, stage scenarios, gaslight their partners to look unstable." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "That sounds dark," Adrian said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Even for you. The darkest stories are always the most revealing." Curtis stood, pulling out his wallet. "I should check on those calls. Banking emergency, you know how it is. Rochelle, I'll meet you at home." His wife's face was a mask of concern that didn't match the ice in her eyes. "Is everything all right?" "Just some account verification. Routine." He dropped cash on the table, enough to cover the bill with a generous tip, and nodded to Linda and Adrian. "Wonderful seeing you both." As he walked out, Curtis's phone buzzed one more time. "Coffee tomorrow? We need to talk. I know what Adrian does. I'm victim number 3. Rita." Curtis Rogers smiled for real this time. The game was on. Chapter 2. The Study. 24 hours earlier, Curtis had known none of this was coming. Or had he? He sat now in his home office, the converted study where he'd recorded 247 episodes of The Unraveling and played back the surveillance footage from his own hidden cameras. Yes, hidden cameras, plural, installed 3 months ago when Rochelle's behavior first changed. Curtis believed in evidence. As a journalist, he'd learned early that truth required documentation. Memory was fallible, video was not. On screen, Rochelle and Adrian stood in Curtis's living room, his living room, while Curtis was supposedly at a podcast recording session downtown. Adrian held what looked like a small camera, attaching it to the bookshelf. "Make sure it captures the whole room," Rochelle said, her voice clear on Curtis's audio feed. "We need him looking unstable, angry. My lawyer said if we can show a pattern of threatening behavior." "I know what we need," Adrian cut her off. "I've done this twice before, remember? The key is consistency. You document every frightening thing he does. The raised voice, the slammed door, the controlling behavior. Build the narrative." Curtis had watched this footage 17 times now. Each viewing revealed new details. The casual cruelty in Rochelle's laugh. The practiced way Adrian positioned the cameras. One in the bookshelf, one in the plant, one in what he now realized was Rochelle's designer purse. But the most revealing part came next. "Once we have enough footage, you file for the restraining order," Adrian continued. "He'll be out of the house. Then you file for divorce, claim abuse, and by the time he figures out what's happening, we've liquidated everything. The house, the savings, the investment accounts. Your lawyer said we can make this clean if we move fast. And you're sure about the podcast money?" Rochelle's voice turned greedy. "He never talks about finances. I had my guy look into it. The Netflix deal alone is worth $2.3 million, plus the back catalog licensing. He's sitting on almost $4 million in total assets if you include the house and retirement accounts." Adrian pulled Rochelle close. "We split it 60-40. You get to play the victim, I get to play the savior, and Curtis gets to learn he's not as smart as he thinks." That had been the moment Curtis decided to destroy them both. His background in investigative journalism had prepared him for many things, but not this particular betrayal. Curtis had grown up in Detroit, the son of a mechanic and a teacher, and worked his way through Michigan State on scholarships and part-time jobs. He'd spent 5 years at the Detroit Free Press, breaking stories on corruption, before moving to Chicago to cover organized crime. The work had been dangerous, exhausting, and exhilarating. He'd met Rochelle at a gallery opening 8 years ago, introduced by a mutual friend. She'd seemed different from the journalists and activists in his world. Elegant, cultured, with a sharp wit and ambitious dreams of running her own gallery. He'd fallen hard, proposed within a year, and supported her business launch with his savings. Looking back now, Curtis could see the signs he'd missed. The way Rochelle always positioned herself as the victim in every story. The friends who'd slowly disappeared from her life after mysterious fallouts. The expensive tastes that grew more extreme each year. Her mother Linda's constant commentary about Curtis's career being unstable compared to real estate or finance. But he loved her, or loved who he thought she was. Now, reviewing the evidence, Curtis realized he'd been investigating the wrong story for years. The real crime wasn't in the streets or corporate boardrooms. It was in his own home. His research into Adrian McFarland had revealed a pattern. Both ex-wives had similar stories. They'd met Adrian while married. He'd seduced them, helped them escape their marriages by manufacturing abuse allegations, then disappeared once the assets were divided. Ex-wife number 1, Sarah McFarland, now lived in a trailer park in Nevada, blacklisted from her industry after Adrian's team leaked stories about her instability. Ex-wife number 2, Rita Shaw, had fared slightly better. She'd realized what was happening and tried to fight back, but Adrian's lawyers had crushed her. Curtis had tracked down Rita 2 weeks ago, using the investigative skills that had made his podcast famous. She'd been wary at first, traumatized by her experience, but when Curtis showed her the surveillance footage of Adrian and Rochelle using the exact same playbook, she'd agreed to help. "He's a predator," Rita had told him over encrypted chat. "But he's smart. Everything he does is technically legal until the moment it's not. You need to catch him in the act, with proof that can't be disputed." That's when Curtis had started planning his revenge. The beauty of being a true crime podcaster was that everyone underestimated you. They thought you were just a microphone and some editing software, not realizing that every episode required investigation, evidence gathering, witness interviews, and narrative construction. Curtis had spent 15 years learning how to build ironclad cases. Now he'd apply those skills to his own life. His phone buzzed. The unknown number from dinner. Rita. They're planning to move fast. File restraining order Monday. You have 72 hours. Curtis looked at his screens, at the evidence he'd been gathering, at the elaborate trap he'd been constructing. Everything had to be perfect. Rochelle and Adrian thought they were hunting him, but the truth was more interesting. Curtis Rogers was a patient man, and he'd spent 3 months turning their scheme against them in ways they'd never see coming. Chapter 3, The Alliance. Curtis met Rita Shaw at a coffee shop in Naperville, 40 minutes outside Chicago. She'd chosen it, neutral territory, far from anywhere Rochelle or Adrian might randomly appear. She was already seated when he arrived, nursing a black coffee and looking like she hadn't slept well in months. Rita was 36, but looked older, with dark circles under her eyes and a wariness that reminded Curtis of domestic violence survivors he'd interviewed. "Thank you for meeting me," Curtis said, sliding into the booth across from her. "I should thank you." Rita's voice was soft but firm. "When I saw Adrian with another married woman at that charity gala, I knew he was doing it again. I've been trying to figure out how to warn you without blowing everything up. The text last night was perfect timing. They had the whole dinner recorded, probably planning to edit me looking aggressive or unstable." Rita nodded grimly. "That's his signature move. He did the same thing to me. Dinners with my family, work events, even therapy sessions. He and my ex-husband's lawyer built this entire narrative of me as an unbalanced, vindictive wife. By the time I realized what was happening, I'd lost everything." Curtis pulled out his tablet, opened an encrypted file. "I need you to walk me through his entire playbook. Every tactic, every legal trick, every step of the process. Because I'm not just going to stop them. I'm going to flip the entire scheme." For the next 2 hours, Rita detailed Adrian's operation. It was more sophisticated than Curtis had initially realized. Adrian targeted women in marriages with significant assets, seduced them slowly, then convinced them they were in abusive relationships, even when they weren't. He'd use recording devices, stage conflicts, and careful manipulation to manufacture evidence. His network included a corrupt lawyer, a private investigator willing to fabricate reports, and even a therapist who diagnosed husbands as dangerous based on coach testimony from the wives. "The genius of it," Rita explained, "is that he always stays in the background. The wife files everything. She's the victim. Adrian just happens to be the supportive friend who's there to help her escape. By the time the husband realizes he's been set up, Adrian and the wife have liquidated accounts, transferred assets, and disappeared. Then Adrian dumps the wife and moves to the next target." "Where's your ex-husband now?" Curtis asked. Rita's face tightened. "Dead. Suicide, 6 months after the divorce was finalized. He lost his business, his reputation, his kids. Adrian's lawyer made sure everyone believed the abuse allegations." Her eyes met Curtis's. "I don't want that to be you." Curtis felt cold rage settle in his chest. This wasn't just about money or betrayal. Adrian McFarland was systematically destroying lives, and Rochelle was his willing accomplice. "It won't be," Curtis said quietly, "but I need your help. I need documentation of Adrian's previous schemes, access to his ex-wives, anything that shows a pattern." "I kept everything," Rita said. She pulled out a flash drive. "Emails, text messages, financial records, even recordings from when I started to suspect what he was doing. It's all here. But Curtis, he's protected. His lawyer is connected. His private investigator has friends in the police department, and he's careful never to cross the line into obvious illegality." Curtis smiled. That's where he made his mistake. He's careful with the law, but he's sloppy with people. He doesn't understand that patterns of behavior tell their own story. And unlike his other victims, I'm not alone. Over the next hour, Curtis explained his plan. He'd been documenting everything for 3 months. Every conversation, every surveillance attempt, every instance of Rochelle, and Adrian's manipulation. But more importantly, he'd been crafting a counter-narrative. His podcast audience included lawyers, judges, journalists, and law enforcement. He'd been slowly building episodes about financial fraud in marriages, gaslighting tactics, and manufactured abuse allegations. All while his listeners had no idea he was researching his own case. When I'm ready, Curtis said, I'm going to release a special series. The Unraveling, Personal Edition, complete with audio evidence, video footage, financial records, and expert analysis. I'll expose not just what they did to me, but what Adrian's been doing for years. It'll be the most documented case of marriage fraud in podcast history. Rita stared at him. That's brilliant, but it's also dangerous. Adrian will come after you with everything he has. Let him. Curtis's voice was cold. I've interviewed mob bosses and serial killers. I know how to protect myself. And I've got something Adrian doesn't. The truth, fully documented, ready to go public. But Rita shook her head. There's something else you need to know. Adrian doesn't just use legal tricks. When ex-husband number 1 tried to fight back, there was a break-in at his office. Files destroyed, threats made. Adrian's connected to some dangerous people. Curtis had anticipated this. He pulled out another file. That's where my friend Eugene comes in. Eugene Steele, best criminal defense attorney in Chicago, and my college roommate. He's been helping me build a legal fortress. Everything I've gathered is backed up in multiple locations with dead man switches. If anything happens to me, it all goes public automatically. He slid a business card across the table. Craig Carter, private investigator, former FBI. He's been doing deep background on Adrian, including those dangerous connections. Turns out Adrian's been playing both sides, blackmailing some of his own partners, skimming money from joint ventures. Craig has witnesses ready to talk. Rita's eyes widened. You've been planning this for 3 months? 3 months and 2 weeks, Curtis corrected. Since the night I found the first hidden camera. Rochelle thought I didn't notice when she moved my awards shelf 6 inches to the left. But I'm a documentarian. I notice everything. He pulled up another file on his tablet, showing a complex web of connections. Adrian's network is his weakness. He's betrayed so many people that they're all just waiting for a reason to turn on him. All I have to do is provide that reason. Rita leaned back, a small smile crossing her face for the first time. You're actually going to do it. You're going to take him down. Them, Curtis corrected. Rochelle made her choice. She's been actively trying to destroy my reputation, steal my assets, and paint me as an abuser. That's not a mistake or a manipulation. That's a conscious decision to ruin someone's life for profit. What do you need from me? Curtis counted off on his fingers. First, testimony. You'll go on record about Adrian's pattern. Second, connections. I need to talk to ex-wife number 1, Sarah. Third, you're going to send me updates on their planning. You're still in Adrian's orbit. He doesn't see you as a threat. Feed me information. Done. Rita pulled out her phone. Sarah's in Nevada, but I can get your number. She'll talk. She's been wanting to tell her story for years, but was too scared. And I can definitely keep tabs on Adrian. He still calls sometimes, trying to keep me quiet with threats disguised as friendly advice. Curtis stood, extending his hand. Then we're partners in this. Thank you, Rita, for the warning, for the courage, for fighting back. Rita shook his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Thank you for taking him seriously. My therapist said I should just move on, forget about Adrian, focus on healing. But some wounds don't heal until you get justice. As Curtis drove back to Chicago, his phone rang. Eugene Steele. Curtis, we have a problem. Rochelle just filed paperwork to liquidate your joint investment account. Her lawyer's claiming it's for gallery expansion, but the timing is suspicious. Let it happen, Curtis said calmly. I moved the real money 3 weeks ago. That account only has $50,000 in it. Enough to make them feel successful, but not enough to matter. Let them think they're winning. Eugene laughed. You sneaky bastard. Where'd you move it? Offshore trust, ironclad prenup violation documentation, and a paper trail that shows Rochelle's been planning this for months. When we go to court, her own actions will prove fraud. And the restraining order they're planning? Monday morning, you said? Curtis smiled. Perfect. That gives me the weekend to finish my preparations. By the time they file, I'll have everything in place. He hung up and checked his secure email. Craig Carter had sent an update. Surveillance photos of Adrian meeting with his corrupt lawyer and private investigator. Curtis added them to his growing evidence file. The trap was set. Now, he just had to let Rochelle and Adrian walk into it. Chapter 4. The Performance. Monday morning arrived with an unexpected twist. Rochelle didn't file for a restraining order. Instead, she doubled down on the performance. Curtis found her in the kitchen, making his favorite breakfast, French toast with strawberries, coffee exactly how he liked it. She was wearing the silk robe he'd bought her for their anniversary. Her hair perfectly styled, smile warm and inviting. "Good morning, darling," she said, kissing his cheek. "I thought we could talk about last night. I know dinner was tense." Curtis played along, keeping his expression neutral. "Your mother certainly has opinions about my career choices. She doesn't understand what you do." Rochelle slid the French toast onto a plate with practiced grace. "But I do. I'm proud of you, Curtis. The Netflix deal, the podcast success, you've built something incredible. And you're trying to steal it," Curtis thought, but he smiled. "Thank you. That means a lot." This was new. In his experience researching con artists and manipulators, a sudden shift to excessive kindness usually meant they'd change tactics. Curtis excused himself to check his phone. "Change of plans." Adrian told Rochelle to delay the restraining order. "They're worried about your podcast audience. Too much public sympathy if you're suddenly painted as abusive. New strategy. Slow manipulation. Make you file for divorce, then flip it on you as abandonment." Clever. Adrian was adapting, realizing that Curtis Rogers came with a built-in audience of 2 million people who trusted his judgment. A sudden restraining order would raise questions, especially among fans who'd heard Curtis discuss manufactured abuse allegations in his episodes. Curtis typed back, "Perfect. Let them think I'm buying it." Meanwhile, I go to Phase 2. Phase 2 was simple. Make Adrian overconfident. Give him a target he couldn't resist. Curtis returned to the kitchen, where Rochelle was scrolling through her phone. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about what Adrian said at dinner about investing. The Netflix money is just sitting in accounts earning nothing. Maybe I should look into some property investments." Rochelle's eyes lit up. Actual, genuine excitement. "Really? Adrian knows so much about real estate. I'm sure he'd be happy to give you advice." "That'd be great. Maybe we could have dinner, the three of us? Somewhere more relaxed than Bellamy's. I'd love to pick his brain about high-end residential properties." Curtis watched his wife's face carefully. This was the moment. Would she see through it? Or would greed win? Greed won. It always did. "I'll set something up," Rochelle said, already texting. "Adrian will be thrilled. He loves mentoring people on investments." Mentoring. Curtis bit back a laugh. Adrian McFarland was about to learn what it meant to be investigated by someone who'd exposed corporate fraud, mafia operations, and wrongful convictions. That evening, Curtis drove to a warehouse in an industrial district of Chicago. Inside, Craig Carter had set up a command center, computers, surveillance equipment, and files covering every surface. "Welcome to Mission Control," Craig said, gesturing around. The former FBI agent was 52, gray-haired, built like a linebacker gone slightly soft. He'd worked with Curtis on 3 podcast episodes about wrongful convictions and had a personal hatred for people who manipulated the legal system. "Tell me you found something," Curtis said. Craig pulled up a financial spreadsheet. Adrian McFarland is in deep shit. He's been running a Ponzi scheme through his real estate investments, using new investors' money to pay returns to old investors. It's not technically active fraud yet because everyone's still getting paid, but the moment the music stops, he's looking at federal charges. How long until the music stops? 6 months, maybe less. He needs a big infusion of cash to keep the scheme going. Craig smiled grimly, "Which is why he's targeting you. Your Netflix money would buy him another year, maybe 2. Curtis felt the pieces falling into place. "So this isn't just about Rochelle's divorce settlement. Adrian needs my money to save himself from federal prison." "Exactly. And there's more." Craig pulled up another file. "Remember how I said Adrian had dangerous connections? Turns out one of his investors is Vince Winters, a loan shark with ties to organized crime. Adrian owes Vince $2 million, due in 3 months. Curtis whistled. That's a death sentence if he doesn't pay. Now you're thinking like a criminal. Craig leaned forward. Adrian is desperate. He's not just greedy, he's panicking, which makes him sloppy. And sloppy criminals make mistakes. Then let's give him a reason to make more mistakes. Curtis pulled out his phone and opened his banking app, the fake one he'd created with Craig's help. It showed a balance of $4.2 million across multiple accounts. Tomorrow night's dinner, I'm going to flash this to Adrian. Tell him I'm considering a major investment, but I need to move fast for tax purposes. Let's see how desperate he really is. Craig nodded, and I'll have surveillance on the entire dinner. Audio, video, everything. When he pitches you his Ponzi scheme, we'll have him on wire fraud. But Curtis shook his head. Wire fraud isn't enough. I want him destroyed. Reputation, finances, freedom. Everything. What did you have in mind? Curtis smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. Adrian thinks he's running a con on me. But what if I'm running a con on him? What if I make him believe I'm not just investing? I'm a bigger fish than he realized. Someone with connections to other wealthy investors. Someone who could bring him the kind of money that solves all his problems. You want to set up a sting, Craig said, understanding dawning. Get him to commit fraud on camera, try to rope in fake investors. Not just fraud. I want him bragging about his previous schemes. I want him on tape explaining how he manipulates women, destroys marriages, launders money. Everything. Curtis pulled up his tablet, showing a script. I've been studying con artists for 15 years. I know exactly what to say to make Adrian show off. He's arrogant. He can't resist proving he's the smartest guy in the room. Craig looked at the script, then at Curtis. You're not just destroying him. You're making him destroy himself. And Rochelle, Curtis added, she gets to watch the man she betrayed me for reveal himself as a fraud and a monster. Then she faces her own consequences. His phone buzzed. Eugene Steele. Judge Ramirez confirmed for Friday. Restraining order hearing if they file. But also, paperwork ready for your countersuit. We can hit them with fraud, conspiracy, alienation of affection, and about 6 other charges the moment you're ready. Curtis typed back, hold position. I want more evidence first. 1 week, maximum. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Curtis recorded a podcast episode about long-term cons and sophisticated fraud schemes, planting seeds with his audience about the story to come. He met with Rita again, getting more details about Adrian's tactics. And he spent 3 hours with Eugene, building an airtight legal strategy. Tuesday evening, Curtis dressed carefully for dinner at Mercer's, an upscale steakhouse in the Gold Coast. Rochelle wore designer everything, her mask of loving wife firmly in place. Adrian arrived in a custom suit, all charm and confidence. Curtis, good to see you again, Adrian said, shaking hands with that firm grip that screamed alpha male. Rochelle says you're interested in talking investments? Very interested. Curtis let his enthusiasm show, calculated, not too eager, but enough to intrigue. The Netflix deal came through bigger than expected, and my accountant is pushing me to diversify. Real estate seems stable compared to entertainment. Over appetizers, Curtis let Adrian pitch his properties. Luxury condos, mixed-use developments, vacation homes in Cabo. All real projects, all successful on paper, all part of Adrian's scheme to look legitimate before revealing the real opportunity. Then Curtis went for it. This all sounds great for someone looking at 100K, maybe 200K investments, Curtis said, pulling out his phone, the one with the fake banking app. But I'm thinking bigger, much bigger. He turned the phone so Adrian could see the $4.2 million balance. I want to move fast, close by in a month. And I've got friends in entertainment with similar amounts looking for investment opportunities. People trust my judgment after the podcast success. Adrian's eyes widened just slightly. Then his salesman smile appeared. Well, if you're talking that kind of money, we should discuss my private investment fund. Limited partners only, much higher returns than traditional real estate. And there it was, the Ponzi scheme being pitched over medium rare steak. Curtis leaned forward, letting himself look intrigued. Tell me more. For the next hour, Adrian explained his fund, how it worked, the returns, the exclusivity. Every word was being recorded by Craig's hidden devices. Every number, every promise, every fraudulent claim captured in crystal clear audio. Rochelle watched with barely contained excitement, seeing her future fortune multiply before her eyes. Curtis played the eager Mark perfectly, asking technical questions that made him look smart but not suspicious, showing enthusiasm without commitment. Finally, he said, "I need to run this by my financial advisor." "How soon do you need an answer?" "Ideally by Friday," Adrian said. "I've got a major deal closing next week, and I can only bring in 2 more partners before we hit the fund limit." Bullshit, Curtis thought. "You need the money by Friday to pay Vince Winters." "Let me make some calls," Curtis said, shaking Adrian's hand. "This could be exactly what I've been looking for." In the car ride home, Rochelle was giddy. "That went so well. Adrian really likes you, Curtis. And that investment fund sounds incredible." Curtis nodded, keeping his eyes on the road and his thoughts to himself. At midnight, he met Craig at the warehouse. The audio was perfect. Adrian's pitch, his financial promises, even a moment where Adrian had mentioned other clients in a way that revealed the scheme structure. "We've got him on wire fraud," Craig said. "With your testimony and this recording, federal prosecutors would take the case." "Not yet," Curtis said. "I want one more meeting, where Adrian explains his entire operation, including what he did to his ex-wives, what he's planning to do to me. I want everything." Craig looked concerned. "Curtis, you're playing with fire. If Adrian realizes you're setting him up." "He won't," Curtis interrupted, "because Adrian McFarland believes he's the predator. He can't conceive of himself as prey." Chapter 5. The Reveal. Curtis spent Wednesday setting the final pieces of his trap. He called Adrian directly, bypassing Rochelle, and used the magic words con artists couldn't resist. "I need to tell you something in confidence." They met at Adrian's office, a sleek space in a downtown high-rise that screamed money, real and imagined. Curtis had Craig's surveillance team in position, cameras and audio recording from multiple angles. "I want it on your fund," Curtis began, "but I need to be honest about something. My marriage to Rochelle is falling apart." Adrian's expression was carefully neutral, but Curtis saw the flash of excitement. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. It's been over for a while. We just haven't admitted it." Curtis leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The thing is, I know about you and Rochelle. I've known for months." Adrian froze. Then his mask slipped back into place, smooth and controlled. "Curtis, I don't know what you think." "I'm not angry," Curtis interrupted. "Actually, I'm relieved. Rochelle and I haven't been happy in years. You did me a favor." Adrian studied him, recalculating. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to handle the divorce my way, quietly, without drama. And I want to invest in your fund, keep that separate from the marriage drama." Curtis pulled out an envelope. "I had my lawyer draw up a post-nup agreement. Rochelle signs this, she gets the gallery, $500,000 cash, and we part ways friendly. No lawyers, no media circus, no podcast episode about my failed marriage." It was bait, and Adrian bit hard. "That's surprisingly mature of you," Adrian said slowly. "Most men in your position would burn everything down. I'm a journalist. I know how public accusations destroy reputations, even false ones. I've seen women use abuse allegations to win divorces, and I've seen men lose everything fighting charges that were never real." Curtis let that sink in. "I'd rather pay Rochelle off and move on with my life than risk becoming a headline." Adrian relaxed, leaning back in his chair. "You're smarter than I thought. Most guys are so emotional about affairs. They don't see the bigger picture." "The bigger picture is money," Curtis agreed, "which is why I want to invest with you. But I need to know something first." He paused, as if gathering courage. "Your investment strategy, is it like your relationship strategy? Multiple partners, everyone getting a return until the right moment?" It was a risky question, dancing right up to the edge of exposing his knowledge. But Curtis had judged Adrian correctly. The man's ego couldn't resist. Adrian smiled, a genuine expression for the first time. "You really are smart. Most people don't see the pattern." He poured 2 glasses of expensive scotch. "The marriage game and the investment game aren't that different. It's about identifying opportunities, managing risk, and knowing when to exit. "Tell me about your exits," Curtis said, accepting the drink. The two ex-wives, were those part of the strategy? And Adrian, feeling safe with someone he thought was a fellow cynical operator, started talking. For 43 minutes, Curtis sat and listened as Adrian McFarland detailed his entire scheme. How he identified married women with wealthy husbands. How he seduced them slowly, playing the role of sympathetic friend, then passionate lover. How he coached them to manufacture abuse allegations, document frightening behavior, build cases for restraining orders. "The genius is the cameras," Adrian explained, warming to his subject. "The wives record everything, every argument, every slammed door, every raised voice. Then we edit it, provide context that makes the husband look dangerous. By the time we're done, there's so much evidence that the husband can't fight back without looking guilty." And the money? The wives liquidate assets before filing for divorce, transfer funds to accounts I help them set up. We claim it's for their safety, fleeing an abuser. Then after the divorce, we split everything 60-40. Adrian swirled his scotch. "The wives think they're in love with me. I let them believe it for 3, maybe 6 months after the divorce. Then I find reasons to move on." Curtis kept his voice casual. "What about the husbands? Don't some of them fight back? That's where my lawyer earns his money. We bury them in legal fees, drag out proceedings, make accusations they can't disprove. Most guys give up and pay to make it end." Adrian's smile turned cold. "One guy tried to expose me. I had my PI find dirt on him, leaked it to his employer, destroyed his reputation. He killed himself 6 months later." Curtis felt rage threaten his carefully maintained composure, but he forced it down. "That's efficient. It's survival," Adrian corrected. "The world is predators and prey. I choose to be a predator." "And Rochelle? She's your current project?" Adrian laughed. "Rochelle is perfect, ambitious, materialistic, narcissistic enough to believe she deserves whatever she can take. Your Netflix money will solve several problems for me. The investment fund needs cash, I've got some obligations due soon, and Rochelle gets to feel like a mastermind. What happens when she realizes you're using her? By then, I'll have her on tape helping commit fraud. She can't expose me without exposing herself." Adrian raised his glass. "See? Everyone thinks they're the smartest person in the room, but there's always someone smarter." Curtis raised his glass in return, clicking it against Adrian's. To being the smartest person in the room. They drank. Adrian had no idea that Curtis's glass had a tiny recording device embedded in the base, capturing every word from a different angle than Craig's remote surveillance. Redundancy in evidence gathering. Curtis had learned that from 15 years of journalism. "So, when do I get my money?" Adrian asked, getting to the core of his interest. "Friday," Curtis said. "I'll wire the $4 million to your fund. But I need Rochelle to sign the post-nup by Thursday. Can you make that happen?" "Consider it done." Adrian pulled out his phone, texting immediately. "She'll sign whatever I tell her to sign." Curtis stood, shaking Adrian's hand one final time. "Pleasure doing business with someone who understands how the world really works." "Likewise. You're going to do very well with me, Curtis." As Curtis left the office, he felt the weight of what he'd just heard. Adrian had confessed to fraud, conspiracy, manipulation, and indirect responsibility for a death. All on camera, all in his own words. Curtis called Eugene immediately. "Do we have enough? For criminal charges?" "Absolutely. For civil suits? More than enough. For the court of public opinion." Eugene's voice held grim satisfaction. "This is going to be the biggest fraud expose since Theranos." Next, Curtis called Rita. "Can you get Sarah McFarland on the phone?" "Tonight. I'll try." "Why?" "Because I need her to know that her ex-husband's suicide is about to be vindicated. Adrian just confessed to destroying him on purpose. That's conspiracy, harassment, maybe even manslaughter, depending on how aggressive the prosecutor is." Rita's voice broke. "Curtis, you're really doing it. You're taking him down. Not just him." Rochelle signed on to this knowing what Adrian had done before. She's not a victim. She's an accomplice. They both go down. That night, Curtis couldn't sleep. He sat in his office, reviewing footage and evidence, thinking about Adrian's words. the world is predators and prey. Maybe that was true, but Adrian had made a fatal mistake. He assumed Curtis Rogers was prey because he was the husband, the mark, the target. He never considered that Curtis might be a predator too, just a different kind. The kind that hunted hunters. Chapter 6, The Collapse. Thursday morning, Rochelle signed a post-nup agreement over breakfast, practically glowing with excitement. She thought she was signing away her marriage for $500,000 in the gallery. What she was actually doing was providing written evidence of fraud. The document Curtis's lawyer had carefully crafted to include clauses about full financial disclosure and no hidden assets or conspiracies. By signing, Rochelle was legally certifying she had nothing to hide. When her conspiracy with Adrian was revealed, the document would prove perjury on top of everything else. "I'm sad it's ending," Rochelle said, her tone utterly unconvincing. "But I think this is best for both of us." Curtis nodded, playing his role one last time. "Agreed. Clean break, no drama. When do you transfer the money to Adrian's fund?" "Tomorrow morning. I'm meeting with my financial advisor this afternoon to set up the wire transfer." Curtis watched his wife's face, seeing nothing but greed and self-satisfaction. Whatever love they'd once shared had been thoroughly incinerated by her choices. He spent the afternoon at Craig's warehouse, preparing for the final phase. Eugene arrived with a district attorney named Wallace Schwartz, 50-ish, with a reputation for prosecuting white-collar crime and a personal hatred for people who manipulated the court system. "This is extraordinary," Wallace said, reviewing the evidence. "Adrian McFarland has been operating for at least 6 years, possibly longer. The fraud charges alone would put him away for 20 years. "What about Rochelle?" Curtis asked. "Conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, theft by deception. She's looking at 5 to 7 years minimum. More if we can prove she knew about his previous victims." Wallace looked at Curtis with something like sympathy. "Are you prepared for how public this is going to be? Your marriage, your personal life, it'll all be in the news." Curtis had considered this. His podcast had made him a public figure, which meant his divorce would be scrutinized. But he'd also spent 15 years building credibility and trust. When people heard the full story, with evidence, they'd understand. "I'm prepared," Curtis said. "I've documented everything, including my own mistakes and blind spots. I'm not claiming to be a perfect victim. I'm showing the truth." Eugene cleared his throat. "There's one more element we should discuss. Vince Winters, the loan shark Adrian owes money to. Craig's sources indicate Vince is getting impatient. If Adrian doesn't pay by end of week, Adrian becomes someone else's problem," Craig finished. "These are not people who accept excuses." Curtis considered this. Part of him wanted Adrian to face legal consequences, trials, prison, official punishment. But another part, the part that had heard Adrian laugh about driving a man to suicide, thought maybe Vince Winters provided a different kind of justice. "Let's proceed as planned," Curtis decided. "Legal charges, public exposure, full prosecution. If Adrian wants to run from Vince Winters, that's his choice." Friday morning arrived. Curtis dressed in his best suit and prepared for the confrontation he'd been orchestrating for months. Eugene and Wallace had arranged for FBI agents to be standing by, ready to execute search warrants. Craig had camera crews positioned, and Curtis had one final episode of The Unraveling queued up and ready to release. The title, The Unraveling, when the hunter becomes the hunted. At 9 a.m., Curtis called Adrian. "I'm at my bank, ready to transfer the money. Just need you to confirm the account numbers." Adrian's voice was eager. "Finally, let me pull up the details. Actually, there's a problem." Curtis let his voice sound concerned. "My bank flagged the transfer. Something about federal fraud investigations into the destination account. Do you know anything about that?" Silence on the other end. "Then, what are you talking about?" "Adrian, I'm a journalist. Did you really think I wouldn't research your investment fund? I know about the Ponzi scheme. I know about the missing money. I know about Vince Winters." More silence. Curtis could practically hear Adrian's mind racing. "Curtis, I can explain. I'm sure you can. But I don't want explanations. I want you to know something. I've been recording you. Everything. The dinner at Mercer's, our meeting at your office, every word you said about your schemes, your victims, your strategies. It's all documented. Adrian's voice turned dangerous. You're bluffing. Curtis played a clip from Wednesday's recording. Adrian's voice saying, one guy tried to expose me. I had my PI find dirt on him, leaked it to his employer, destroyed his reputation. He killed himself 6 months later. That's just the audio, Curtis continued. I also have video. Financial records. Testimony from Rita Shaw and Sarah McFarland. A paper trail showing how you've been running this con for 6 years. And in about 30 minutes, it all goes to the FBI, the DA's office, and my 2 million podcast listeners. You son of a bitch. No, Adrian, you're the son of a bitch. You destroy families for profit. You drive people to suicide. You manipulate and gaslight and steal. And you made one fatal mistake. You try to con someone who makes a living exposing cons. Curtis ended the call and immediately dialed Rochelle. She answered on the first ring, probably expecting good news about the money transfer. Hey, sweetheart, Curtis said, his voice ice cold. I need you to come home right now. We have some things to discuss. And you should probably bring a lawyer. Your own lawyer, not Adrian's guy. Curtis, what's going on? I know everything, Rochelle. The affair, the cameras, the plan to frame me as abusive, the asset liquidation scheme. All of it. And in 20 minutes, the FBI is raiding Adrian's office. I suggest you decide right now whether you want to be his accomplice or his victim. He hung up before she could respond. At 9:30 a.m., Eugene called with confirmation. FBI is executing search warrants now. Adrian McFarland's office, his home, and his storage units. They've also frozen all accounts associated with his investment fund. At 9:45 a.m., Curtis released his podcast episode. The description read, a true crime documentary about my own life, how my wife and her lover attempted to destroy me through fraud, gaslighting, and manufactured abuse allegations, complete with audio evidence, financial records, and confessions. Sometimes the story finds you. By 10 a.m., the episode had 100,000 downloads. By 11 a.m., it was trending on Twitter. By noon, news outlets were picking up the story. Curtis sat in his office, watching his carefully constructed evidence do its work. His phone exploded with calls from reporters, supporters, other victims of similar schemes. He'd prepared a statement, scheduled interviews with reputable journalists, and arranged for Rita and Sarah to tell their stories publicly. At 2 p.m., Rochelle came home. She looked destroyed, makeup smeared from crying, designer clothes wrinkled, her whole facade crumbling. Curtis, please. Don't, he interrupted. I gave you so many chances to be honest, to be a partner, to be decent. You chose Adrian instead. You chose fraud and manipulation and cruelty. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Curtis handed her a folder. Your lawyer should review these. Divorce papers, filed this morning. I'm not asking for alimony or assets. I'm demanding return of everything you and Adrian try to steal, plus penalties for fraud. You'll also be facing criminal charges for conspiracy, perjury, and theft. Rochelle collapsed into a chair. My career, my reputation. Should have thought of that before you tried to destroy mine. Curtis felt no satisfaction in her pain, just exhausted relief that it was finally over. The gallery is probably finished. Your wealthy clients won't want to be associated with a fraud case, and Adrian's going to prison for at least 20 years. Maybe more if they charge him with manslaughter for Sarah's ex-husband's death. You planned all of this, Rochelle said, looking at him with something like terror. You knew for months, and you just played along. I documented it, Curtis corrected. There's a difference. I gave you every opportunity to stop, to confess, to show remorse. You never did. You doubled down every single time. His phone rang, Craig. Curtis, you need to turn on the news. Adrian just got arrested trying to flee the country. FBI caught him at O'Hare with fake passports and $200,000 cash. Curtis turned on the TV. There was Adrian McFarland in handcuffs, being led through the airport by federal agents while news cameras captured every moment. Rochelle watched the screen, her face ashen. What happens to me now? That's up to the DA and your lawyer. Cooperate, testify against Adrian, and you might get a reduced sentence. Or fight it and go to trial, where every piece of evidence I gathered gets aired in public. Curtis stood. Either way, You're out of this house in 24 hours. Eugene has temporary custody orders. This is my home, purchased before our marriage, and you have no legal claim to it." As Rochelle left, Curtis felt the weight of 3 months lift from his shoulders. It wasn't over. There would be trials, appeals, media attention. But the hard part, the deception and documentation and performance, was finally done. He'd beaten them, not through violence or revenge fantasies, but through patience, intelligence, and turning their own weapons against them. Curtis Rogers poured himself a scotch and sat down to plan the next phase. Healing, rebuilding, and making sure Adrian McFarland and Rochelle Rogers faced every consequence they'd earned. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The trial of Adrian McFarland began 6 months later in federal court, downtown Chicago. Curtis sat in the gallery every single day, a silent witness to justice finally being served. District Attorney Wallace Schwartz had built an ironclad case. Adrian faced 17 counts of wire fraud, 8 counts of conspiracy, 5 counts of blackmail, and 1 count of manslaughter for his role in driving Sarah McFarland's ex-husband to suicide. The evidence Curtis had gathered formed the backbone of the prosecution: audio recordings, video surveillance, financial records, testimony from multiple victims. Rita Shaw took the stand first, composed and powerful despite her obvious trauma. She detailed how Adrian had seduced her, manipulated her into divorcing her husband, then abandoned her with nothing while keeping half the assets for himself. "He told me I was special," Rita testified, "that we'd build a life together. But it was all lies. He'd already moved on to his next target before our divorce was even finalized." Adrian's defense attorney tried to paint Rita as a scorned woman seeking revenge, but Wallace demolished that narrative with financial records showing Adrian's pattern across 6 years and 3 victims. Sarah McFarland testified via video link from Nevada, too traumatized to appear in person. Her testimony about her ex-husband's suicide was devastating. Curtis saw several jurors wiping tears as Sarah described finding her ex-husband's final note, which explicitly mentioned Adrian's campaign of destruction. "My husband wasn't perfect," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "But he didn't deserve what Adrian did to him. The false accusations, the job loss, losing his children. Adrian destroyed him systematically, methodically, and he laughed about it." The defense's strategy was predictable. Claim Adrian was simply a successful businessman whose romantic relationships had gone sour, that the prosecution was criminalizing affairs and business disputes. But Curtis's recordings destroyed that defense. When Wallace played the audio of Adrian confessing, "One guy tried to expose me. I had my PI find dirt on him, leaked it to his employer, destroyed his reputation. He killed himself 6 months later," followed by Adrian's laugh. The courtroom went silent. Curtis watched Adrian's face crumble. The confident predator had become a cornered animal, realizing too late that he'd been caught on tape admitting to ruining a life for sport. The prosecution's financial expert, a forensic accountant named Milton Hammond, testified about Adrian's Ponzi scheme. He'd traced funds through shell companies, offshore accounts, and fake investment vehicles, a web of fraud designed to steal from investors while maintaining the illusion of success. Mr. McFarland's fund never made legitimate investments, Milton explained. He was using new investor money to pay returns to old investors while skimming 40% off the top for personal expenses. The scheme would have collapsed within 6 months if Mr. Rogers hadn't exposed it. Adrian's lawyer tried to suggest that Curtis had somehow entrapped his client, but Wallace was ready with legal precedent. Entrapment requires law enforcement coercion. Mr. Rogers was a private citizen documenting crimes being committed against him. That's called evidence gathering, not entrapment. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Curtis attended every day, watching Adrian's defense crumble piece by piece. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. At sentencing 2 months later, Judge Nelson Fowler addressed Adrian directly. "Mr. McFarland, you are a predator who exploited people's trust, destroyed families, and showed no remorse for driving a man to suicide. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, to be followed by 10 years of supervised release. You will also pay $3.2 million in restitution to your victims. Adrian's face was blank as he was led away in handcuffs. Curtis felt no joy, just satisfaction that the system had worked. Rochelle's case was separate, handled in state court. She'd hired an expensive lawyer who argued she was a victim of Adrian's manipulation, that she'd been seduced and misled into participating in the scheme. Eugene had filed for divorce immediately after Adrian's arrest, and Curtis had pushed for maximum legal consequences. Her trial was shorter, just 1 week, but the evidence was equally damning. Curtis testified about Rochelle's active participation in planting cameras, her discussions with Adrian about liquidating assets, her signing of fraudulent financial documents. The post-nup agreement she'd signed, which included clauses about no hidden assets or conspiracies, became powerful evidence of perjury. Rochelle Rogers was not a victim. Prosecutor Armando Tucker told the jury. She was an active participant who knew exactly what she was doing. The evidence shows her discussing strategy, planting surveillance equipment, and lying under oath about her financial dealings. Rochelle's mother, Linda, testified for the defense, claiming Rochelle had always been easily influenced and that Curtis had driven her into Adrian's arms with his demanding career. Curtis sat through this testimony without reaction, knowing the evidence spoke louder than Linda's spin. The jury found Rochelle guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, and theft. Her sentence was lighter than Adrian's, 7 years in prison with possibility of parole after 4, but it was still justice. At her sentencing, Rochelle finally addressed Curtis directly. "I'm sorry for what I did to you. I was greedy and stupid, and I believed Adrian when he said you'd never find out." Her voice cracked. "I hope someday you can forgive me." Curtis said nothing. Forgiveness wasn't on the table yet. Maybe never would be. Rochelle had made her choices with full knowledge of the consequences. She tried to destroy his reputation, steal his money, and frame him as an abuser. Sorry didn't fix that. But Curtis did feel something unexpected as Rochelle was led away. Not satisfaction, but sadness. Sadness for what might have been if she'd chosen differently. Sadness for the 8 years they'd wasted. Sadness for the person he thought he married, who had never actually existed. Chapter 8, Aftermath. 6 months after both trials concluded, Curtis sat in his office recording a special episode of The Unraveling. This one was different. It wasn't about someone else's crime. It was about healing, rebuilding, and moving forward after betrayal. Recovery isn't linear, Curtis told his listeners. "I thought once Adrian and Rochelle were convicted, I'd feel closure. But justice and closure aren't the same thing. Justice happened in a courtroom. Closure is something you build yourself, piece by piece, day by day." The podcast episode about his own case had been downloaded 10 million times, spawning a Netflix documentary series that Curtis had executive produced. He'd used the platform to highlight other victims of similar schemes, connecting people who'd been isolated and gaslit by manipulative partners. Rita Shaw had become a close friend and advocate, speaking publicly about her experience and working with legislators to strengthen laws around financial fraud in marriages. Sarah McFarland had found therapy and support, slowly rebuilding her life in Nevada. Curtis had helped both women financially from his lawsuit settlements. Money recovered from Adrian's seized assets. Eugene Steele had successfully unwound all of Adrian's fraudulent financial maneuvers. Curtis recovered his full investment accounts, plus damages. The house was entirely his. And the Netflix deal, which Rochelle had hoped to steal, had turned into something even bigger. A multi-year agreement covering not just his existing podcast, but new true crime series, including a show about marriage fraud. But the victory felt hollow sometimes. Curtis found himself attending therapy, processing the betrayal with a psychologist named Dr. Joan Landry, who specialized in trauma from intimate partner betrayal. "You did everything right," Dr. Landry told him during one session. "You documented, you protected yourself, you sought help. But that doesn't mean you weren't hurt." Curtis nodded. "I keep thinking about the dinner at Bellamy's. The moment I got Rita's text. I'd suspected for months, but seeing the confirmation, knowing my wife was actively working to destroy me, that broke something." "What broke?" Trust. My ability to trust my own judgment. If I missed the signs that Rochelle was capable of this, what else am I missing? Dr. Landry leaned forward. Curtis, narcissists and sociopaths are skilled deceivers. Adrian McFarland fooled multiple women over many years. Rochelle wore a mask in your marriage that even her mother believed. You're not naive. You were deceived by experts. That helped somewhat. But Curtis still found himself hypervigilant, suspicious of people's motives, reluctant to date or trust new relationships. He threw himself into work instead, channeling his energy into exposing other frauds and helping other victims. One afternoon, Craig Carter called with unexpected news. Vince Winters was arrested. Federal racketeering charges. And guess who testified against him? Tell me. Adrian McFarland. He's cooperating with the FBI to reduce his sentence. Turns out Adrian kept records of all his dealings with Vince. Insurance policy in case things went south. Curtis laughed bitterly. So Adrian's screwing people over even from prison. There's more. Rochelle's asking to see you. Her lawyer contacted Eugene, saying she has information about other victims Adrian targeted but never closed deals with. She wants to help. Curtis considered this. Rochelle had served 18 months of her 7-year sentence at a minimum security facility. Reports indicated she was a model prisoner, attending education programs and therapy. But Curtis didn't know if her offer to help was genuine or just another manipulation. Tell her lawyer I'll think about it, Curtis said finally. That night, Curtis stood in his office looking at the evidence boards he'd kept up, physical reminders of how close he'd come to being destroyed. Photos of Adrian, Rochelle, Rita, Sarah, financial records, audio transcripts, the entire documented web of lies and manipulation. He'd won. Adrian was in prison for 25 years. Rochelle was paying for her crimes. Curtis had his money, his reputation, his career. By every objective measure, he'd achieved victory. So why did he still feel empty? His phone buzzed. Rita, dinner tonight? Group thing with Sarah and some others. You need to get out of that house. Curtis smiled. Maybe closure wasn't something you achieved alone. Maybe it was something you built together with other survivors, other people who understood what betrayal felt like. He typed back, I'll be there. Chapter 9, Rebuilding. 18 months after Adrian's conviction, Curtis Rogers stood on a stage at the Chicago Convention Center, addressing a room of 500 people at the first annual conference on marriage fraud awareness, an event he'd organized with Rita Shaw and several advocacy groups. Fraud in intimate relationships isn't just about money, Curtis told the audience. It's about trust, identity, and our fundamental belief that the people we love will protect us, not prey on us. When that trust is shattered, it damages us in ways that go beyond financial loss. The conference had attracted victims, lawyers, therapists, and journalists from across the country. Curtis had used his platform to shine light on a problem most people didn't know existed: sophisticated schemes where one partner systematically manipulates and defrauds another, often with the help of third parties like Adrian McFarland. During breaks, people approached Curtis with their own stories, some similar to his, others with unique twists. He listened to each one, took notes, and connected people with resources. Some would become future podcast episodes. All of them deserve to be heard. Rita found him after his keynote speech. You did good up there. Really good. Thanks. How's Sarah doing? Better. She's actually speaking on the panel this afternoon about recovering from traumatic loss. It's been a long road, but she's finally starting to heal. Curtis nodded. Sarah McFarland had struggled more than any of them. She'd lost her ex-husband to suicide, lost her business and reputation to Adrian's schemes, and spent years in depression and isolation. But slowly, with therapy and support, she was rebuilding. She'd even started a nonprofit helping families of suicide victims, particularly those whose deaths were connected to fraud or financial manipulation. Have you thought more about Rochelle's offer? Rita asked carefully. Curtis had thought about little else. Rochelle had written him a letter from prison, not asking for forgiveness, but providing names and details of other women Adrian had targeted. She'd included financial records she'd kept as insurance during their scheme, evidence that could help several other victims pursue civil suits. I'm going to accept her help, Curtis said. Not because I forgive her, but because those victims deserve justice too. And if Rochelle can provide that, I'll work with her. Rita squeezed his arm. That's very mature of you. Or very practical. Adrian destroyed a lot of lives. If Rochelle's information helps even one person recover what they lost, it's worth swallowing my pride. The afternoon panels covered everything from legal reforms to psychological recovery to financial protection strategies. Curtis participated in a panel about documentation and evidence gathering, sharing the techniques he'd used to build his case against Adrian and Rochelle. The key is consistency, Curtis explained. Don't just document the big moments, document everything. Emails, text messages, financial transactions, conversations. Build a timeline. Because when you finally decide to act, you want evidence that's ironclad. A woman in the audience raised her hand. But doesn't that mean living in constant suspicion? Not trusting your partner? Curtis considered this. That's the tragedy of what people like Adrian do. They don't just harm their direct victims. They make all of us more suspicious, more guarded, less trusting. They poison the well for everyone. After the conference, Curtis met Eugene Steele for dinner at a quiet restaurant. Not Bellamy's, never Bellamy's again. Eugene brought good news. The final settlement from Adrian's assets had been distributed to victims, including substantial payments to Sarah and Rita. You're completely whole again, financially, Eugene said. The house is paid off, your accounts are restored, and you've got the Netflix money. You could retire if you wanted. Curtis shook his head. I'm 40 years old. I'm not retiring. Fair enough. But maybe you could start living again? Date someone? Take a vacation? I went to Italy last month. A working vacation to research a new podcast series doesn't count. Eugene leaned forward. Curtis, you won. You destroyed the people who tried to destroy you. You helped other victims. You changed laws. You built an empire. At some point, you have to let yourself be happy. Curtis knew Eugene was right. But happiness felt foreign, like a language he'd forgotten how to speak. He'd spent 2 years in survival mode, documenting, planning, executing his revenge, testifying at trials, building advocacy networks. Now that the battles were over, he didn't know what to do with peace. I'm working on it, Curtis said finally. Dr. Landry says I'm making progress. I've stopped checking for surveillance cameras in every room. I can sleep without nightmares most nights. That's something. It's a good start. Eugene raised his glass. To the next chapter. Curtis clinked glasses, hoping his friend was right about new chapters and fresh starts. 2 weeks later, Curtis received a call from the FBI. Agent Lewis Foster, who'd led the investigation into Adrian's operation, had an update. We've identified 7 additional victims of McFarland's schemes, Lewis said. Women he was grooming, but hadn't fully committed to fraud with yet. Your documentation helped us stop him before he could finish what he started with them. 7 women who wouldn't lose their marriages, their money, their trust. 7 families who wouldn't be destroyed. Curtis felt genuine satisfaction for the first time in months. There's something else, Lewis continued. Rochelle Rogers has been cooperating extensively from prison. She's provided information that led to arrests of Adrian's corrupt lawyer and the private investigator who helped fabricate evidence. Both men are now facing charges. Curtis thought about Rochelle in prison, probably realizing too late what she'd sacrificed for greed and a man who never loved her. He didn't forgive her, might never forgive her, but he could acknowledge that she was trying to make amends. Tell her lawyer I'll write a letter to the parole board when the time comes, Curtis said, acknowledging her cooperation. That's all I can offer. That's more generous than most people would be. Maybe. Or maybe Curtis was just tired of carrying rage and hurt. Rochelle would serve her time, and when she got out, she'd face a destroyed reputation and limited opportunities. That was consequence enough. 3 months later, on a crisp October afternoon, Curtis recorded the final episode of his series on marriage fraud. He documented everything. His own case, Rita's experience, Sarah's tragedy, and the stories of a dozen other victims. The series had won awards, prompted legislation in 4 states, and helped countless people recognize manipulation in their own relationships. This is Curtis Rogers, and this has been the Unraveling Marriage Fraud Edition, he said into the microphone. We've covered a lot of painful ground together. Stories of betrayal, manipulation, and systematic fraud. But we've also covered resilience, justice, and recovery. Because the thing about being unraveled is that you can always reweave yourself into something stronger. He paused, thinking about the journey from that dinner at Bellamy's to this moment. To everyone listening who's been manipulated, gaslight, or defrauded by someone they trusted, you're not alone. Document everything. Seek help. Trust the evidence even when your heart wants to deny it. And know that justice is possible, even when it feels impossible. Curtis ended the recording and sat back in his chair. The office that had been his command center during the investigation now felt like just an office again. The evidence boards were gone, replaced by awards and photos from the advocacy conference. The surveillance equipment was packed away. The multiple locks on doors and windows had been removed. He was ready to move forward. His phone buzzed. A text from Rita. Saw your Instagram post. Italy again? Taking someone with you this time. Curtis smiled. He'd been seeing someone casually for a few months, a librarian named Amelia Glover who didn't listen to true crime podcasts and had no idea who he was when they met at a bookstore. They'd gone on 5 dates, and Curtis was slowly learning to trust again. Slowly learning that not everyone was lying, not everyone had hidden agendas, not everyone would betray him. Maybe on the next trip, he typed back to Rita. Baby steps. Baby steps are still steps, Rita replied. Proud of you. Curtis looked around his office one last time before heading out for dinner with Amelia. The case was closed. Adrian was in prison. Rochelle was paying her debt. The victims had been helped. Justice had been served. Most importantly, Curtis Rogers had survived. He'd been targeted by a predator, betrayed by his wife, and nearly destroyed by a sophisticated fraud scheme. But he'd fought back using his intelligence, his skills, and his refusal to be broken. He'd won not through violence or revenge fantasies, but through patience, documentation, and turning his enemies' weapons against them. He'd proven that being smart and methodical beat being ruthless and cruel. As Curtis locked his office and headed out into the Chicago evening, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope for new relationships, new stories, new chapters. Hope that the worst was truly behind him. The unraveling was complete. Now came the rebuilding. And Curtis Rogers was very, very good at building things that lasted. Epilogue. 5 years later, Curtis released a new book, The Predator's Playbook, Recognizing and Stopping Intimate Partner Fraud. It became a New York Times bestseller, required reading in law schools, and a resource for therapists and advocates nationwide. Adrian McFarland remained in federal prison, his early release denied after he was caught running another scheme from behind bars. Rochelle was released after serving 4 years, moved to Oregon, and worked quietly as a bookkeeper, avoiding media and public attention. Rita Shaw founded a nonprofit helping victims of marriage fraud, funded partly by Curtis and partly by settlement money. Sarah McFarland became a prominent advocate for suicide prevention and financial abuse awareness. Curtis married Amelia Glover 3 years after they met. They had a small wedding, surrounded by friends who'd helped him survive his darkest time. Eugene was best man. Rita and Sarah were among the guests. The Unraveling podcast continued, but Curtis expanded its focus beyond true crime to include stories of resilience, justice, and recovery. He wanted to document not just how people were victimized, but how they fought back and won. Because Curtis Rogers had learned the most important lesson of all. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's survival, success, and building a life so good that your enemies become irrelevant. And that was exactly what he did.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.